Good morning, everyone. Welcome to first Cabinet meeting for 2023. Notice of recording to advise everyone that this meeting will be webcast for live and subsequent broadcast via the Council's YouTube site. Anybody in the room is free to record, take photographs or video of the meeting if they wish to do so. Apologies. I've received apologies first of all from Councillor Majid Mahmood, who's stuck on the Aston Expressway. Secondly, from Councillor Sharon Thompson, who's joined us over Teams because here's Majid. She's dealing with a problem with her house this morning. And then I have apologies from Janie Berry with Rob Connolly substituting, Andy Caldrick, Justin Varney, and Becky Hellard with Sarah Pitt substituting for the latter. Becky is in fact joined us over the Teams as well. Are there any other apologies? Graham Betts, okay.
I think somebody else.
Okay. Well, hopefully someone will turn up in due course.
Yeah.
We will note all of those apologies. Item 3 is declaration of interest. Anybody wish to declare an interest in respect of anything on today's agenda? John?
Do you have to declare an interest if you carry the Clean Air Zone charge?
I wouldn't have thought so. Well, no.
Only if you receive it.
Yeah, only if you receive it. Okay, we'll move on then. Item 4 is the minutes. Everybody happy that the minutes of our meeting on Tuesday, 13th of December are accurate? Thank you. I will sign them in due course. Item 5 then is exempt information and possible exclusion of the press and public. We have exempt appendices in respect of items 6, 19 and 20. Does anybody, Robert?
Thank you. It's not a request for exempt information, but before we move on to substantive item, a number of us will have been emailed about the LTN and particular item 13. One of the requests from residents was that item 13 is considered before item 12. So it's just a request that we flip them round. I think it's the idea that residents want the council to make a decision on whether or not to proceed with it before they allocate the money that 12 does.
That makes sense. Thank you for pointing that out. Yep, please.
I think the reason why it's in that order is that obviously within the report on the use of the Clean Air Zone surplus revenues is an allocation for the following report. And that's the reason why it's in, we've asked to have it in that order on the agenda.
Oh, so we agree the money before moving on to consider the proposition. Okay.
If you look at the recommendations that we've got in the report without getting into the substance of it, along with the allocation, and there's a specific reason for the order on the agenda. So I'd ask that we follow that, please.
Okay, thank you. John?
Sorry, item 6, please.
You wish to discuss the exempt appendices? Okay, in which case then we will go into private session at the end of the meeting to consider item 6. That does give us a little bit of difficulty that I'll come to in a second. And I will formally move the resolution that's in the agenda under item 5 to take us into private session. We will then return to public session to consider the recommendations. Is that agreed? Okay, Jane, I know you have to leave, so please feel free to do so. We've got Peter Bishop in the room who no doubt will be able to answer any questions that might be raised. So we'll take item 6 then at the end of today's agenda. So moving then to item 7, business rates income 2023-24. Yvonne.
Business rates report seeks approval of the City Council business rates income projection for 2023-24. For submission to the Parliament, this forms the calculations for the next financial year's income for business rates and will lead to the 2024 midterm financial planning assumptions where approval will be sought by Cabinet in February.
Thank you. Any comments or questions on this? Robert? No.
It's kind of exciting.
Okay. In which case then, can we agree then recommendation 2.1? That agreed? Thank you. Item 8 then, financial monitoring report. Yvonne.
Thank you, Leader. The Council seeks approval of the council base for 2022-23 for the City Council, New Tranquilly, in Birmingham Parish Council and the Royal Sutton Coldfield Town Council. The council tax base of Birmingham is calculated at 263,262 Band D equivalent properties for 2023 to 24, compared to 258,362 for 2022-23.
Yvonne, we're on the financial monitoring report.
Oh, I'm so sorry. Which one is that? I'm so
said
sorry.
that.
This is a report on the financial position for month 8. Council strategic aim is to deliver within the revenue budget. However, because of the cost of living crisis and pressures within our children's services, this year has been particularly tough. There is a risk that if we do not sufficiently mitigate these pressures, we will overspend at the end of the year. The potential overspend now stands at 37.7 million, whilst this is an improvement of 3.6 million since our month 7 financial report. It remains a significant risk to the council. In order to manage this risk, the council's returned to rigorous spending controls in July 2022, with the expectation that these spending controls are probably delivering by Q3. The spending controls on staffing, facilities management and procurement were in place measures to ramp up the benefits of these measures. As well as the spend controls, we are identifying further mitigating actions, including reviewing all those reserves we are holding. We will continue to assume delivery of savings. A number of savings are currently rated as medium or high risk. The value of high risk savings has reduced from 13 million to 4.1 million. The council's leadership team is working to ensure that all these savings are achieved by the end of the year. Any non-delivery will result in further risk of overspend. In terms of the capital budget since month 7 report, further slippage of 13 million has been identified within city operations, the City Operations Directorate. Work is being undertaken with directorates and project managers to explore opportunities to reprofile or review methods. Cabinet will receive the Q3 in February. The financial position is gradually, as services are adhering to spending controls, and we hope to show further improvements in it. I would add that whilst the council faces a very tough year financially, it is in a robust financial position with strong financial planning processes in place and earmarked reserves remain healthy and within the recommended limits. The recommendations, Leader, is that the Cabinet is asked to approve the use of 8.9 million of the budget scheme being reserved to cover corporate savings where we can see progress in the budget. These savings are complex and ambitious, but the expectations is that those savings will be fully achieved financials by 2023-24. The Cabinet also asked to approve the use of 1.5 million should it be required. This is to guarantee sufficient funding for the Birmingham 2023 anniversary festival. Cabinet has already approved funding of 1.5 million for this last September. This funding is expected to come from underspend of Commonwealth Games, and the financial resilience reserves would only be used as a last resort. Thank you, Leader. And forgive me for my over-medication again on drugs, because I haven't done what it is. I've got this easy thing, so I'm trying to so thank you.
Thanks very much, Yvonne. Robert.
Thank you. I want to pick up a few issues. On 2.2, it highlights that some of the Oracle overspend has been capitalised. Clearly, obviously, it's worth Cabinet remembering that because it's been capitalised, that doesn't mean taxpayers aren't paying for it anymore. It just means it's not on the revenue budget. Under 2.3, it highlights the 5 million risk from income shortfall under adult social care. Can we just get a bit of detail about that? So is that in relation to the pause in direct debits that took place because of issues with the implementation of Oracle, and that's meant people have ended up building up arrears who wouldn't have otherwise built up arrears in the income? Yes. Under 2.8, it talks about a 0.6 million overspend in SEND early help, but this is against a nil budget, according to it. So can we just get some explanation about how a service area with zero budget is able to overspend? Because if they don't have a budget, presumably they don't have any ability to spend money. 2.9 picks up that homeschool transport overspend. Clearly, obviously, this is no doubt related to the additional work that was done around trying to fix the service last September, so the beginning of this school year. Does that mean then that budget is going to be reprofiled and increased permanently come next financial year, or other actions going to be taken to bring it back into line with where the budget was at the beginning of this financial year? And then just picking up that last point that the cabinet member talked about in section 4, and obviously some of the budget smoothing reserve has been used for some of the savings, which have now been marked as delivered. But if we're using reserves to cover the savings for this year, even if they are going to be delivered in future years, they clearly are not yet delivered. And therefore, I think that perhaps could be better laid out in the way that savings table is portrayed. Thank you.
Good.
Yeah, thanks very much. As what came out part of the briefing that we get just before we come to this was that just with Sandy asked that some of the overspend is around agency staff, and I was just a bit intrigued as to sort of how that developed over the timescale, sort of with all the rules that are in place regarding agency staff. Did the council not know, or how did it come to light? And did the council approve the overspend on the agency staff? Just seems a bit surprising because the rules that are around giving that.
Just declare. Sorry? Okay, first of all, I'm going to declare an interest in respect of sending us service. I've just spoken to the legal officer, and I'm advised because this report is for noting, I do not need to leave the room, but we'll come back to the point you raised. Yvonne.
Thank you. I'm just Sarah, your appropriate officers to pick up on the issues.
Okay, so the first issues were in, the first issue is on packages of care. Sarah. And then I think the second one was on
2.8, the
2.8, yeah, the overspend against the nil budget.
Yeah, this is something that was supported by COVID funding, and therefore we are unpicking that, and the process of transferring this group of early health workers to sit alongside the main early health service in the Children's Trust is now underway. You'll be aware of the issues for the children and young people travel service. As the report says, this is a particular issue around late applications. And we have a programme of revising policy alongside driving cost scans that we hope will result in a significant saving in next year. Sue, do you want to add anything? Still want to talk well? Thank you.
Okay, and then the final one was use of reserves for savings.
Yes. So we have a budget smoothing reserve that we set up in order to recognise time delays around some of our savings. And so we have requested the use of that. We only use it where we can see solid delivery occurring. So we are confident around delivery of savings. It is a timing issue with the money coming out rather than no activity occurring whatsoever. So if we couldn't see activity, we couldn't see delivery, we wouldn't use the budget smoothing reserve. But we have that reserve specifically.
Apologies for that. Did you want to follow that particular?
Yeah, if I can.
Yes.
But would it not be better to have an additional line in the chart that was ones which we expect to be delivered in future years, hence there being, because it clearly hasn't been delivered at month 8, nor is it being delivered by the end of the financial year, otherwise the reserve wouldn't need to be used. So listing it as delivered in a chart that is updating at month 8 does seem misleading to the layperson reading the report.
I'm happy to take that forward.
Okay, and then I'm advised we're going to provide you with a written response.
Okay.
With that then, can we agree recommendations 2.1 through to 2.5? Agreed?
Agreed.
Item 9 then is now on the council tax base for 2023-24.
Thank you, Peter. The council tax report seeks approval of the council tax base for 2024. The City Council, New Clancy and Birmingham Parish Council and Royal Suffolk. The council tax base for Birmingham is calculated at £260 3,000 found to be public properties for 2020, compared to 258,262 for 2023.
The increase of 4,900 largely relates to an increase in the number of new properties built
and a decrease in the number of council tax reports collected. Due to the impact of the cost of living crisis and economic uncertainty, it is recommended that the assumed collection rate in money actually received for council tax of 2023-24 stays at 96.85%, the same as 2022-2023, rather than return to pre-COVID 97.1%.
Thank you. Any comments on this, councillor Tagspace? No? We agree on the recommendations 2.1 to 2.4. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Item 10 is proposed Borsall Heath Neighbourhood Council outcome and consultative ballot and next steps. As I think we're all aware, consultation on the proposal to create a new parish council in Borsall Heath was carried out between January and July of last year. Council then approved that the process should move to the next stage and a consultative ballot should be carried out. That ballot was held between the 1st of November and the 15th of December last year, and it was a postal ballot. However, there was an initial delay in posting ballot papers to electors in one of the two wards this proposal covers. So that period for the ballot, 1st of November to the 15th of December, was extended by 2 weeks because of that issue. Unfortunately, that was not the only issue that arose during this period, because there was also industrial action taken by Royal Mail, which meant that there were concerns and not all of the ballot papers would be received back by the council by the 15th of December. So again, the proposal was that all ballot papers that were received by the 30th of December would be taken into account and included in the returns that are set out within the report. Now, the process that we've agreed for the creation of new parish councils includes that the ballot should achieve a turnout above a certain threshold. And the threshold should be 25% or the latest turnout in the relevant ward or wards in the last city council election, and whichever is the lowest would be the threshold. So we look back to last May and the local elections. The turnout for Sparkbrook and Borsall Heath East was 25.1%, and the turnout for Borsall Heath West was 30.62%. As a result of that, the threshold required for this consultative ballot was set at 25%. Now, in the event, the number of people who voted in this particular ballot was 2,374. 1,839 were cast in favour, which represented just over 77%, and 529 were cast against, which is just over 22%. Unfortunately, the turnout was 22.05%, so just short of the required threshold. Now, I've spoken to the two ward councillors about this report and the recommendation, and they are in agreement with recommendation 2.1, which is that what we should now do, because of these problems, is we should provide further information and engagement in the area to increase awareness of the proposal amongst residents and gain further evidence of the strength of support for this parish council, and that we should conduct a second consultative ballot of all electors in the area, which will be completed no later than the end of October this year. Now, the reason I think that is a sensible way forward is two ward councillors have also expressed some concern to me that in the engagement we have done thus far, it was not made clear enough that if a parish council is established, that would then require a precept on people's council tax, i.e. an additional payment. And I think the further period of engagement and raising awareness, we do need to make that crystal clear to the people in this area where this parish council is proposed. I'll take any questions, Robert.
Thank you. I definitely agree that it must be absolutely crystal clear about what the powers are, particularly that it would potentially lead to a precept being added. I think it's a sensible step forward, both in terms of it hasn't met the turnout threshold at this point, so clearly can't proceed, but continuing with it given the closeness seems reasonable. I'll add two questions. One is, have we done a piece of study, and this shouldn't change this decision because it's happened and we had a deadline of the 30th, but how many more, if any, ballots have come back after December 30th to see if, because that might gauge just how impactful the strike was or not on the process here. And have also on 7.3.2, it says that previous costs were met within existing resources and new costs will be met within existing resources. But it doesn't actually say what the costs were either previously nor going forward. And clearly, if Cabinet's going to know what's being spent, even if it's from existing resources, it should have what the actual cost is in it.
Right, we're getting that answer. Ewan?
Yeah, I mean, as most people probably know, I'm also a town councillor, parish councillor, so I am supportive of these bodies. I can see what they bring to local residents. So the town parish councils generally do consider themselves as a council closest to the local public. So I totally understand all this. I was involved, obviously, the setting up the Sutton Coldfield Town Council, which was set up in 2016. So I can feel the, not quite the pain's not the right word, but I can feel all the effort that's going into this to get it set up. I was just wondering in particular, what are you doing differently to get the extra 3%? And more importantly, what you're doing to keep the 22% on board? Because obviously, when you build things up, you've still got to keep those 22% engaged and want to carry on and get forward on that. And also it's just wherever the funds coming from on the ballots. I think it says they're coming from somewhere, but I didn't see on the report where it was coming from. And just to echo Councillor Walden's point, I think I'm still getting Christmas cards at the moment, so I'll be interested to know how many ballot papers are still being received first time round, and probably that's the message to say that even if they're coming in now still, the people will still have to go through the process again. Thanks very much, Lou.
Perhaps I should just say at this point, Ewan, in respect of what we're going to do to continue to engage with people, I have received representation from the independent chair of the NC steering group, and we will continue to work with them as we take forward some further engagement. That they have argued that even if the 3% were short of the threshold, even if all of the votes that make up 3% had come in, that would still have resulted in a vote in favour. So they've actually asked me to today to confirm that we'd go ahead with this. But given what I've said, given that we didn't meet the threshold, and given that the concerns that have been expressed to me by the two ward councillors, I do think it's right and appropriate to have further engagement and a further ballot on this. And I do understand the steering group were disappointed in that, but we will continue to work with them. John.
Thank you. When the policy was going through, I was arguing the threshold was too high. And I do wonder that if there were no implications around this, whether you would proceed on the 22% turnout on the basis that was argued by the chair of the independent panel. Given what you said, I think moving to a second ballot is sensible and fair. Of course, the way to achieve the turnout in a ballot of this kind is to make it really controversial, to have a much closer result and much greater opposition, and to really lam up the fact they're going to charge you lots of money for a precept. That's the way you could achieve a turnout on a ballot of this kind. That's one of the issues with these things, is that if everybody seems to agree, then you get a low turnout, whereas if it's controversial, you can get a high turnout. In the report, it says, it does indicate the possibility of setting up a council before the April 2024, and I think April 2024 is going to be quite tight now with the second ballot anyway. And I wondered whether there was any consideration being given to setting up a shadow council that would be elected but without the full powers yet, so it could demonstrate to the community how it might work, and even do some work on what kind of precept it might levy and what it would spend it on, and provide some assurance that it would work, or evidence that it wouldn't work either way.
I think I'd be reluctant to go down that route before we've got a ballot and a ballot return, because I think that's sort of putting the cart before the horse. I think we've got to go ahead in the way that the recommendation sets out in this report. And as I've said, continue to work with the steering group who are looking at this. In particular, I think we've got to communicate more clearly that there would be a precept on the council tax if this parish council came into intervene. And I think what we need to do is carry out that second consultative ballot early enough that we can put things in place for, if there is a positive vote, the parish council will be setting up and levying that precept for the following financial year. So we've got to make sure the timing works around all of that. Your two questions, Rob, on how many more ballots have been received since the 30th of December and one on the cusp. I'm going to bring Rob Cole in.
Yes, I did speak to our suppliers yesterday to ask that very specific question. They were unable to give me an exact figure, but what they did say it was merely a handful. It would not have affected turnout or the overall result. Just to sort of respond to Councillor Mackey's point on the Christmas cards, I suppose when I was thinking through that question, it also depends on when those Christmas cards were posted. Because we have to remember that even with the late send out of some of the ballot papers, everyone would have had it by about the 15th, 16th of November, and every constituent or elector would have had the opportunity, or at least 28 days, in which to respond. Also, in terms of the cost question, in terms of carrying out the ballot, that would be in the region between £9,000 to £10,000. And I'm kind of looking at one of my colleagues behind you, and I think there is some internal government funding that we can tap into that will cover some of that cost, but I can confirm that with you after the meeting.
There was a nod from the officer behind.
I missed that.
Okay, can we agree then? Recommendation 2.1. That agree? Thank you. Item 11 then is approval of supported housing strategy, a framework for short-term supported housing, also known as exempt accommodation. Councillor Sharon Thompson has joined us online, so she can present this report, albeit under the regulations, not allowed to vote. Sharon.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Leader. This report's coming through in terms of exempt accommodation, as we've been talking about it across the city for some time, but it's titled the short-term tenancy, transitional tenancy, and that's because it eliminates provision for older people, long-term provision for older people. That's eliminated from that. But in terms of the consultation that took place, it was a month-long consultation, and we had 125 responses from across the city, and nearly half of those included professionals, residents living in local neighbourhoods who were impacted by exempt accommodation, and of course landlords and service users. So it's particularly pleased that we have had service users and landlords who provide the provision also taking part. If this is agreed at Cabinet today, there will be a need for a detailed action plan to be developed, which will also take into consideration national policy and the local requirements in Birmingham. There's been extensive work, as we know, that's taken place in this area in Birmingham, and we have helped to inform some of the work that's taken place nationally. The work that we've done in terms of in terms of the inquiry, and also in terms of our submissions through the pilot, has helped inform some of the work that we're doing included in this framework. So I'm asking Cabinet to approve this so that we can move forward. This also includes looking at the possibilities of actually what would happen if if there was decommissioning that took place, and also how do we start to reduce the supply within the system to make sure that it meets the need of the actual Birmingham need rather than the size that it's at the moment.
Thank you, Sharon. Any comments or questions? Go on, John. I'll take you first.
Thank you. This is a very interesting report and very interesting strategy. It told me some things about supported housing, exempt housing that I wasn't aware of. I've just had a request from our scrutiny lead that the development of the action plan be shared with scrutiny, and they'd be involved with. Very interested in doing so. I have is whether, in the light of what this says, more could be done to prevent people claiming for the housing benefit for supported housing if they're not actually providing support.
Thank you. Robert.
Thank you. Broadly welcome this and look forward to seeing the detail that will come out. Would suggest that there's one minor technical change ought to be made to the report. So under 1.5 and in section 9, the background documents, it talks about the council's scrutiny review, but obviously that, and it links to it, but that scrutiny review was amended at full council in December 2021, and it's not the amended version that's linked to it's the original version. Clearly the council policy should be based on the amended version. So I'd ask that when you agree on this, you also make that amendment. Then the other thing is on the delivery plan. Clearly, as the Cabinet member talked about, that's going to be needed. I couldn't see a time scale in here. So can we get an idea of what time scale we're placing on developing that delivery plan so it doesn't slip? And then just finally, on the other point the cabinet member raised about reducing the number of units and where they're decommissioned, would urge the council as part of this to look at the feasibility of buying up exempt units in the city and converting them back to single dwelling units. Thank you.
Marion?
Thank you, Leader. So I just wanted to speak in support of this item. And as stated in the report, supporting housing provides crucial help to some of the most vulnerable people in the community. It can have an enormous positive impact on individuals' quality of life, their physical and mental health, their engagement with the community, and help them to maintain their independence. For some people, supported housing may be a long-term option, as support needs are unlikely to change throughout the course of a lifetime. But for others, supported housing might be a step along the way to a fully independent living. For example, for those recovering after a period of mental ill health, though through helping people to increase or maintain their independence, supported housing can also be a cost-effective way of supporting people by reducing their future need for more intensive support, such as residential care or more expensive statutory services. And so I just want to urge Cabinet today to note the outcome of the consultation as expressed by Councillor Thompson, which indicates strong support for the strategy priorities and the objectives as a basis for setting the framework for change alongside actions, building upon learning gained whilst delivering a national oversight pilot, and to approve the framework for short-term supported housing strategy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Sharon?
Okay, thank you. In terms of Councillor Hunt, we've already spoken to Councillor Ball about making sure that we continue to keep this on the work stream for scrutiny in terms of co-ord, because it's cross-departmental, so that will remain there. And I've asked him that if we can do that. Councillor Alden, in terms of the amended version, absolutely, more than happy to ask for that to be amended so it includes the updated scrutiny review, and I think that's just about wording. I will ask Guy in terms of, I do think we need to have timescales on there, and I'll ask Guy just to comment on that. And in terms of properties, that if some properties do become available from exempt accommodation, the council possibility in terms of buying them and flipping them back into council or family housing. What I can say is that this will be absolutely in line with our housing strategy. So the needs that fall within our housing strategy, this feeds into it. So we will be exploring all possibilities. Guy, is there anything, Guy, can you just pick up in terms of what the estimated timeline is on it?
So that work has started in terms of bringing the delivery plan together. And I think the other comment was about making sure that aligns with the scrutiny piece as well. So we'll be taking something back to scrutiny. I think it's March, April time to give an update on where we're at in terms of that delivery plan and how it aligns with the scrutiny review action plan. I will say as well, however, so we've got funding to continue. We've got City Council funding to deliver the oversight work for this year, and we've got a further 2 years slightly reduced funding for up to 2025. So we're tweaking in terms of what we're sort of committing to deliver, aligned to those resources that we're going to be able to bring in for the next 2 years. And obviously as well, a lot of what we've put in the strategy is heavily reliant on the legislative changes that are going through Parliament at the moment. So that delivery plan will be as kind of a live document as and when things change that we need to respond to.
Brilliant. Thank you, Guy. Thanks, Ian.
Thanks very much, Sharon. So with that one change then, in the strategy, we will amend the ONS recommendations to reflect what was approved by council. Can we then agree recommendations 2.1 through to 2.5? So agree? Thank you. Moving on then to item 12, which is the Clean Air Zone revenues, update to Cabinet on revenues forecast and allocation of net surplus revenues. Liz.
Thanks very much, Leader. So this report is an update on how we plan to use the net surplus revenue from the Clean Air Zone. The Clean Air Zone's been in operation for 18 months now, and I think we can say that it's showing good signs of progress. We know that about 93% of the vehicles entering the zone now are compliant with the Euro 6 and Euro 4, and we're seeing reductions of nitrogen dioxide, I think, of about 13%. So that has been very encouraging progress, and we're collecting data all the time and looking at the impact of the scheme overall. This report is an update on the report previously presented in January 2021, which was obviously before the launch of the scheme, provides you with an update of the revenues generated to date and provides an updated forecast through to the end of the current year. And I think it's really important in this context, and given the comment made earlier by Councillor Hunt about having had to pay the fine, that the point of this scheme was never to generate revenue. It is about reaching compliance with clean air as quickly as possible to address the public health emergency of today. So that's why we're doing it. But if we get to the stage where we have net surplus revenue, we're going to put it to good use in line with the purposes that are allowed in the charging order, which are about promoting better air quality and doing things like investing in public transport for that aim of improving air quality. So I'm sure you've all read the report and seen that the purposes to which we're going to use this money. There's an investment in delivering projects within the framework of the Birmingham Transport Plan, which is why I was very concerned that we have the reports in this order. An investment of 3 million in public transport and incentivising people to use buses. Obviously, we have imagine we're stuck on the Aston Expressway in a car, and we need to be able to give buses priority on the street and actually incentivise travel on buses through better ticketing, all those sorts of things. And also, crucially, we're making an investment in the corporate Route to Zero team, which is there to bundle our forces in relation to addressing the climate emergency and the impact of dirty air on our city. And that team very much I see as leading the corporate effort and the strategic approach on addressing the climate emergency. So that we're suggesting some very important and very worthwhile uses of this net surplus revenue. And I hope that everyone supports the recommendations in full. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Liz. John.
Sorry, I thought you were calling another Liz there.
I'm not called John. Sorry.
Can I thank Councillor Clements for doing a site visit in Perry Bar last week, in case I upset her and what I say now. But I don't want to talk about the principle of the clean air zone in particular, because I think there are issues about doing it in such a short-term way. London does a congestion zone charge, and that provides steady income, which everybody pays, and that income is then used in a planned way. And I think what we're seeing here is a very unplanned use of the clean air zone money. I've got 2 points to make. One is, a year ago, I moved at the City Council meeting a resolution on school road safety. And included in was that clean air zone money be used to top up and significantly improve school road safety budgets. And I was very pleased to be told at the meeting that the executive had already decided that this should happen. And indeed, when we got to April, the Labour manifesto promised to invest at least £10 million in making the roads outside schools amongst the safest in our city. Now, that didn't specify that was clean air zone money. It didn't actually specify the timescale of it, but it said £10 million. When we take this report and the next, I'm going to be struggling to find where that £10 million is. And in particular, in this report, apart from possibly the clean air zone monitors, which I think are going into wards, is very difficult to see how money from the clean air zone is going towards a citywide strategy on school road safety, as was promised back in January 2022. The second issue I have with this report is, I think I read the small print of the equality assessment correctly, and it appeared to me to be the identical equality assessment that was used and tabled when the clean air zone was introduced. In other words, that equality assessment looked at the socio-economic impact and pointed out that the impact on poorer people, those who drive old, I'm going to upgrade my vehicle, but those who drive poorer, those who drive older vehicles, small businesses, would be the greatest, and therefore there was, and it particularly identified a number of wards where there might be high impact, which were inner city wards. That doesn't seem to be updated, and therefore there doesn't seem to be an equality impact assessment on the allocation of money, what the impact of the allocation is on socio-economic. And you'd have expected an impact assessment which said, well, we're compensating for that by putting more investment back into those affected wards. And I don't think that's happening, because I think you're seeing the substantial chunks of investment going. The wards named in this ward are Kings Heath, Bournebrook and Selly Oak as receiving the investment. So I think the report is actually flawed because it doesn't have an updated equality assessment.
Okay, we'll establish whether that's the case or not in due course. Robert?
Thank you. We won't go over the rights or wrongs of the Clean Air Zones that's been picked up on the previous, because I wanted to pick up a couple of items. One, under section 4, it's got the options appraisal, and only 2 options are given: do nothing or spend the money as is proposed. I think everyone would be able to see there's clearly at minimum one other option, which is to spend the money differently. And the council's constitution of the 3.2 IC is clear that Cabinet needs to make a proper consideration of available options for action and or inaction. I would suggest a selection of options which is do nothing or spend the money as we say is not a proper accounting of all the available options to Cabinet for the spending of this money. And so far, I'd suggest this report does not actually meet the requirements of the Constitution. When you look at the background documents, it's worth bearing in mind this report is about the allocation of the net surplus revenues from the Clean Air Zone. When you look at the background documents, it doesn't feature a report that went to Cabinet in March the 22nd of this year, just a few weeks before the election, when the then Cabinet member, Councillor Wazam Zappa, and this was the scrutiny chair then, so will have seen sight of this report, I'm sure, allocated a significant chunk of the net reserves from the Clean Air Zone towards creating a clean air fund, which would be 20,000 per single member ward and 40,000 per 2-member ward, so that every ward in the city could benefit from spending that money. Can we get an update on what's happening with that? So has that been removed as part of this? Is it still going to exist? And when's that money going to be available for actually spending on the ground? Because when we speak to local officers about trying to get some projects up and running, they're not aware of how that money can be accessed by each ward. So can we get an update on that as part of this? And then it's a comment really, because I fully appreciate this is what the Cabinet's view is, but I would suggest there are better ways to spend the money in delivering clean air that's been allocated to the 2 large schemes, the Stars and the LTN scheme.
Noted. Magic.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. Yeah, I'm really pleased that part of the surplus revenue will be used to support the operation of the dedicated route to disability. This team includes a dedicated finance and bids lead and behaviour change and engagement lead, which are pivotal for the city to develop and deliver projects to increase the scale and pace of emission reductions, embed positive action on emission reductions across council services and the wider city. So thank you, Liz. Thank you, Leader.
Yeah, a number of points there, so I'll try and go through them all. Prompt me if I haven't remembered them all. Just turning to John's points to start off with, just on our walk around Perry Bar last week, I think was happy to do that. I wasn't upset at all. I think it's really important to go out and walk, because I want people to walk in the city, and until you go out and walk the walk and understand what it's like to be on roads where there isn't a vast amount of traffic passing through, you don't really understand the challenges of mode shift in this city. So it was great to come and see you in Perry Bar, and I have fed back to the officers. A road safety assessment was done in Perry Bar yesterday, and I think we'll be looking at how safe options for people to cross the road, and where you pointed out into the entrance of One Stop. So that kind of stuff, is what I'm doing this job for, because we need to transform the city by making it possible to walk and cycle and use public transport, and obviously drive as well. But we need to reverse that sort of hierarchy that we've had in the past, which always privileged driving. So on schools, what I wanted to remind you about is that we've already agreed in a cabinet report in 2021 that work focusing on schools. So what we're focusing on is car-free school streets. So that we're using the net surplus revenue to fund those schemes in appropriate locations. I really would urge you to work with the schools in your area if they're in a suitable location, because that is how we start to reduce the massive number of short journeys that are taking place generated by the school run, and that's a really good use of this money. You mentioned the air quality monitors. I think our objective in the first phase was to get an air quality monitor into a school in every ward. I think we're quite close to that, and we need, that's what we need to push, because that's, in a sense, children are the most powerful advocates for this, because this is a public health issue. It's about children's health, and making sure that the children are growing up, in our city with healthy lungs, and they're going to have not going to have respiratory and cardiac problems in the future. So it's all about now focus on schools, and we've already made the decision about that. In terms of the equality impact assessment, the EIA is attached to the report, and I think we've gone through it and we're satisfied with it. And again, I come back to the imperative about all of this work on clean air is tackling public health in the city. So really, the people who are most vulnerable to air pollution, precisely young children, older people, and anyone who's got any sort of respiratory problem. And that's a major equality campaign that we need to have. And we're tackling in the way that our the city fathers of the late 19th century tackled dirty water, slum housing. It's at that scale, and that's why we've got to keep on with this and take it seriously. So, and then on Bobby's points, Councillor Alden's points, I think obviously, here is the executive, we're pursuing a strategy on clean air, a wider strategy, not just for the clean air zone. And I think we've made those decisions because we believe that they're the right ones strategically and operationally. And in terms of the local clean air fund, yes, that was already agreed in the last cabinet report in 2021, and that's, as you say, it's an allocation of 20,000 per councillor, so it will be 40,000 in a 2-councillor ward. The officers are working on the guidelines for the use of that expenditure, because obviously it has to be used in line with the clean air charging order, and as far as I know, that guidance will be available very soon, and it will operate, I suppose, if you think of a parallel, it will be like the ward minor transport measures fund. So we need to develop the schemes and in cooperation and with advice from officers, and they need to be things that will promote better air quality.
And just on that devolved money, as you're aware, Robert, we are currently looking at the Constitution. Obviously, there's a solicitor about putting some governance around what is now an increasing amount of money that is being devolved down to ward level in order to ensure that elected members are protected in the process of actually making recommendations for the spend of that money. And we'll pick it up in the small working group that we've got going around the Constitution. Anything else? John?
Yes, thank you for your answer, but I didn't. There was a written question at the last council meeting about what is happening about the schools programme, and the answer was we're engaging with people. It's all this year. So you referred to a report in 2021. I haven't heard how big the funding that is available. Is it £10 million? Where is it? And why are we still engaging this year? Why is it taking another 12 months before anything happens? And I'm frankly not convinced that we're going to see a citywide drive. I think we're going to see 1 or 2 projects. That's what really concerns me. Like we're seeing 1 or 2 projects in King's Heath and Moseley. That's coming up, isn't it? We're seeing small, significant projects in some areas, but not a lot happening elsewhere. What's happening about cars idling about outside schools? Councillor Tilsley's obsession, idling cars, which the council could enforce. Where is enforcement on that?
I think we will be bringing forward, because as you point out, we've made a commitment to the people of this city in the manifesto on which we stood for election last May. So no doubt we will bring proposals forward to fulfil that commitment. Liz?
Yeah, officers have just advised me that the whole programme will be coming in March for the Highways Capital Programme. But I suppose what I want to say to you, John, is I pick up from your answer that maybe you haven't got a school in your ward that's working on a car-free school street, because they're precisely, this is a process where we need to get the schools signed up to a scheme called Mode Shift Stars and get them to look at something called a sustainable travel plan. And once they've done that, then they can move on to looking at the practicalities of a car-free school street. So it is a massive engagement process, because bringing in a car-free school street is actually quite, it's an extra, if you like, management burden for the head teacher and the staff of the school. So it can't be taken on lightly because you have to marshal really the traffic coming in at the beginning and end of the school day. So and at the moment, as far as I know, we've got at least 18 car-free school streets across the city. Now we want to have more, but we've already got a major programme of activity underway, and we're being bold about it. But it actually is an area of work where it's really important to have local councillors leading it and in their role as community champions and engaging with the schools. Because I can think of a number of schools in my patch where I think the head teachers are a bit sceptical just because of what's involved in it, but actually it's really the most effective way to crack the perennial problem of congestion outside schools at the beginning and end of the school day. And we all know that the school run is one of the absolute major generators of all of these short journeys, which are bringing the city to a standstill.
Thank you. Can we agree then recommendations 2.1 through to 2.5? Would agree? Agreed. Item 13 then is Active Travel Fund Tranche 2, Package 2.
12 first.
No, we've not to the Active Travel Fund Tranche 2, Package 2, Kings Heath and Moseley Places for People outline business case. Now, all Cabinet members have been receiving correspondence on these proposals, both for and against, over the last week or so. We've all had opportunity to read all of that email correspondence. We've got arguments both ways on this. Liz.
Thanks very much, Leader. Yes, and I think we know that this is a report that's generated a lot of attention and emails from constituents and residents, not just in Kings Heath but across the city. It's a report with 8 appendices, and the recommendations are as set out. So I'm going to assume that everyone's read this report because of its importance and the amount of controversy that it's generated. But I would just flag up that paragraphs 3.5 and 3.6 really outline the new scheme, which is to the east of Kings Heath High Street. And I think the fact that this report has come with those 8 appendices is an indication of the amount of development work that has been done on this project, and the level of consultation and engagement that has gone on. So I would particularly refer you to the reports the formal consultation exercise, which was reported in January 2022, and then the report of the later engagement exercise, which took place in the autumn of 2022. The leaders already alluded to it. We've had a large number of emails in the run up to this meeting, and I want to thank everybody who got in touch, because it's important that we have active citizens and people who are interested in what the council's doing. So we've all received the messages. A lot of them have been circulated to all Cabinet members. Obviously, I've received a lot more, and I want to say that all of those messages will be read and we will be responding to you. Just because of the sheer volume, I think we will have to just have some standard answers and frequently answered questions. But please be assured that we take seriously all the feedback we get, and we understand the concerns and the issues that have been raised across the piece. So it's controversial, yes, but please remember that what's being sought in this report is approval of an outline business case. So effectively a conceptual design, and there will be further design undertaken, which I hope and I'm very confident will address as many of the concerns raised by residents as possible. It's very important to me that the ward councillors in the affected wards are supportive, and they've done a huge amount of work on the ground to engage with residents and to listen to the concerns that are being raised locally. But I think we should also remember that the reason why Kings Heath became a focus for this work on taking traffic out of local neighbourhoods is that there's been campaigning going on in Kings Heath to try and address the chronic congestion, air pollution in that area for as long as I've lived in Birmingham, really, but I would say intensively for the last 10 years. I have a very vivid memory of when I first came up to Birmingham, taking a group of German visitors up to Coxmore Woods Leisure Centre, and I made the mistake of taking them there in a taxi, and we sat sometime in the summer of 2001 in a traffic jam for almost an hour and a half, and the German visitors asked me, does the city not have public transport? At that point, obviously, I was quite a newbie here, and I didn't have an answer, but that's the sort of background that we're dealing with in the context that we start with on doing this work. And I think, this has been a long process. It started really in 2020, at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, and we have now reached what we believe to be the best available compromise. It is a compromise, and you'll see the description of the outline design in the report. What's happened is we've reduced the number of modal filters. We've assured that there are multiple access points to all of the 5 new proposed cells to the east of Kings Heath High Street. There's a bigger focus on one-way streets, and there's something that's actually really close to my heart as a bus traveller. There is a bus gate on Addison Road, because anyone who ever takes the 11 knows that Addison Road is an awful pinch point and bottleneck in the 11 route around the south of the city. And I think that's very close to my heart, because I did have a short period of a year representing Hall Green. So I got on the 11 close to where I live, and round to Hall Green, and at peak hours, it just was an agonisingly slow journey. And it's by addressing the speed with which buses can pass through transport that we're going to actually make bus travel an attractive and realistic option for people to go about their business. And also, there's going to be some traffic calming treatment on Billesley Lane. And I'm aware that a number of people are concerned about what happens to effectively to the boundary roads around the cells. And again, that's something which I think we can pick up in the more detailed design work. So just to emphasise again, this is asking for permission for us to proceed with the outline business case.
Thank you, Liz.
Sorry, can I just get to the end of my spiel? Sorry. So the scheme is addressing concerns about congestion, pollution, and carbon emissions. It's an absolutely key part of the Birmingham Transport Plan, because a whole element of the Transport Plan is about taking traffic out of local neighbourhoods and making sure that, that local neighbourhoods are places for people to be on the streets and not just through routes for people going through in cars. So we're prioritising walking and cycling and public transport, and trying to address all the issues that John is flagging up in Perry Bar, where we are creating a massive new residential area, and we need to ensure that it's possible to walk around it in safety. And everyone will still be able to drive around Kings Heath and Moseley. I understand that car use is essential. My mum is 83, and driving is is how she can get out of the house now. She finds it difficult to walk. When she had cataract surgery last year, she had a period when she couldn't drive for several months, and I could see that actually the impact on her mental health and her sense of being imprisoned in her own house was really, really dire. So I absolutely understand that there is essential car use, and nothing in this scheme will stop people driving. Yes, it may make some journeys less direct, and you may have to take a different route, but that we are about taking traffic out of local neighbourhoods, and that's what we've stood on a platform that in our election, and the local councillors who stood in Kings Heath and Brandwood, that was part of their offer to the electorate, and they were re-elected with significant majorities. So we are tackling the 250,000 short journeys made by car in Birmingham every day of less than a mile. Those are the journeys that could be for the physically able, they could be easily done on foot or by bike. And so the Kings Heath scheme is a small part of that bigger picture, but we need it's to demonstrate that the approach works. And I think if you go and spend some time on Kings Heath High Street, cycle around it, walk around it, which I do frequently. I go up to Lidl and do my shopping and go to various places on the high street. You see a vibrant area where we have 97% business occupancy rate. And we want people to go to Kings Heath and use the shops and the facilities, the cafes and the bars. And I think we should take inspiration from places like Walthamstow, where they have been pursuing this approach and for several years now, for instance, since about 2013 and 2014, and really seeing the positive impact that it has for businesses, and to the extent that the Daily Telegraph, which has really been campaigning against low traffic neighbourhoods and these, which is actually crowned Walthamstow High Street as one of the most attractive places in Greater London to go and shop. So I urge people to support these recommendations with the knowledge that this is a permission to go ahead with an outline business case, and that we will take seriously the residents' concerns and try to address them in the detailed design work. Thanks. I'm sorry to have gone on at length about that, Leader, but I did want to just set out the context. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Ewan.
Thank you very much, Ian. And I think Liz's desire and commitment to drive this forward is certainly there to be seen. I think what we're looking at here is says in the report, 20 mile an hour speed limits, bus gate enforcement, traffic calming scheme in a low traffic neighbourhood. And if the residents are all on board, I can imagine they'll be really excited about it. I think where these schemes run into difficulties is if the neighbours aren't on board. You say people be able to drive. Obviously, I understand that you won't be able to drive directly from one place to another. You'll have to come out, go onto like a ring road type thing, go around and come in the other side. And, if you're on board, you're happy with that. If you're not, you could see this as a barrier, actually a barrier separating you from other parts of where you want to be, the part of your community. And so I think it's really important that the council makes sure that it's doing things with the residents, not doing things to them. And certainly from some of the email traffic that I've been seeing of late, I would like a bit of reassurance that, the residents are in favour of this and that they are looking to for this to happen. Because if you're doing things to residents that they don't want to happen to them, they'll just find ways around it, and I think it's important that you carry people with you. So I think that's the concern that I've got here, that, are we sure we've got resident buy-in to this? Thank you very much.
Robert?
Thank you. And then, as you touched on, Leader, there's been a huge amount of correspondence that's come in, and I can only assume the cabinet members have got more than the ones we were copied into, from residents. The majority of which I'd say were raising really quite valid concerns that need to be considered by the cabinet, and from what we're seeing in front of us, I don't think they are being considered at this point. And we obviously heard from the cabinet member they'll all be replied to in due course. But clearly, if things were to proceed as they currently are on the agenda, this decision would be taken before those concerns have ever been looked at and responded to by us, as we just heard outlined by the cabinet member. When you look at the consultation documents, you can see under the section of those people with disabilities, you replied 77% are saying this will worsen their travel in the local area. You can see that for all respondents, only 34% are in favour. Those figures drop lower when you look at those people who are visitors to Kingsheath High Street and those businesses on Kingsheath High Street. And that probably explains in some way why I've had so many emails come in from businesses and from Kingsheath Business Association on the High Street who are concerned about the impact of this. And when you look at page 322, it seems to show that all options are rejected by the consultation, that none of them managed to succeed to get a score higher than the neither response. And obviously page 348 goes through it in great detail, a list of specific issues that are raised, but sadly aren't really fully dealt with. And when you look back at the videos that we'll all have seen on Twitter over the last couple of years of the issues that's been on boundary roads with the pollution and traffic jams that have been created by the implementation of stage one, surely the cabinet can agree that actually it really needs to think really carefully about what's done here, because if anything is done that creates that, it's actually going to worsen air quality in the local area. And that's why I really would call on the cabinet to pause this work, do proper consultation with residents and businesses. They'll allow the proper consideration of these concerns that have been raised, that have been emailed in, have been raised for the consultation. Make sure they're answered before a decision is taken, and then look at actually producing a scheme that does have the majority support of local residents, so that it can actually work and deliver the improvements I'm sure we'd all want to see in the local area. And then the final comment, just on the speeding, the cabinet member touched about a number of one-way roads are going to be created. Now, clearly in some locations that can work. Has a study been done on these locations to see whether these are roads that will work on, or roads where by making it one way you'll increase speeding on the road because it will create effectively a clear drag that people can accelerate down? Thank you.
Thank you. Finally, not finally, actually, John.
Thank you. Councillor Izzy Knowles from Moseley is broadly supportive of these proposals, as the cabinet member has indicated. She raised a couple of issues with me. Boundary roads you've mentioned as a significant issue for many residents, and she also felt there's scope for more consultation work around the detail, because she feels that residents are still putting forward ideas and amendments which might be worth taking on board. And she also raised concerns that modal filters, which of course are the planters used to block off roads, could be reduced in comparison with London. I think some of the London schemes I understand are using the automatic nameplate recognition. London's already got the power to do, of course, on no entry signs. I think that's correct. So they're able to use more cameras to police no entries and one-way systems, which Birmingham isn't able to do yet, but may well be able to do in the near future to reduce the impact on people with disabilities who apparently are quite concerned about the amount of street furniture that's going in, both for buggies, for people with sightedness problems. So in terms of the principle, as I said, Councillor Knowles is supportive of it. King's Heath, the voters of King's Heath, I think it is fair to say they did have a choice last May, and they voted overwhelmingly for the candidates who were in favour of it. Our Lib Dem candidate did a consultation. It came out with similar results to the consultation here, which is that when you ask the people who respond to a consultation say they're against it, but the voters of King's Heath had a choice last May and they voted overwhelmingly in favour of candidates who supported it. What I do have concerns about is the amount of funding putting towards it, and that reflects my comments on the previous item. If you look at the breakdown of funding, you see that nearly £1 million from the Clean Air Zone, which has just been approved, £200,000 from that school streets budget, which we don't know how big it is. It would be quite interesting if you look at the breakdown of funding in item 732 paragraph to see what proportion of each budget is being taken for this, because although it's described as matched funding, I think it's correct to say that the government active travel funding going into it is about £500,000 out of a total package of £2.5 million. So it would appear that the costs have inflated quite significantly from what was originally anticipated, and money's had to be found from all over the place to support it. And it does mean that a lot of money is going into one project in one part of the city when there are other parts of the city desperate for road safety measures.
Karen.
Thank you, Leader. I frequently say in meetings outside this one that we will only become a child-friendly city when all my cabinet colleagues are aligned in that aim. And I can go right the way through and include my neighbours that come in that children with additional needs also need to know what their prospects are as adults. But I usually start that process with transport. And I think what the city's children and young people are looking for are bold projects that take us forward in making the city a better place to live, an easier place to get around. And this is a bold rather than a gradual project that starts to take us along that route, and I welcome it for that reason.
Thank you. Liz, if you could address some of the concerns that have been raised, but if you could do that briefly, yes, I would appreciate it.
Picking up a strong vibe, I shouldn't go on not too much about this. I think we need to sort of look up and out here. We're all really proud of Birmingham. I'm chosen to live here. I want this city to aim to be the best environment for mobility and a safe place and a healthy place to walk and cycle around and use public transport. So we need to look, the ward that I used to represent in Oxford, in Cowley, is part of a big scheme to implement low traffic neighbourhoods across East Oxford, with a similar level of controversy and some quite nasty abuse directed at councillors, which I'm afraid has actually been a feature of what's going on in King's Heath as well. So I hope we move on from that in a more collaborative way. But this approach is also being adopted in Lambeth, Hackney, Islington, Haringey, and obviously, the prime example is the London Borough of Walthamstow. London Borough of Waltham Forest, where it's being adopted in Walthamstow. I have to say, I've got some extended family who live in Chingford, where it has not reached, and Chingford is still really blighted by the sort of traffic that we see around Birmingham. So what we're doing is in line with what the best practice across the local government sector to address congestion and traffic blight across urban areas. So I very much empathise with what Ewan is saying about that we people need to be, we need to do it with people, not do it to them. My background is in campaigning in the voluntary sector with disability rights organisations, so that's a message that I take very seriously, and that's why I said several times this is an outline, and we will work further, on the detailed design and try and address as many concerns of residents as we can. Not every concern can be addressed, though. There's a question of practicality, and on this, my feeling, having been, to start off with, an observer of this process as the scrutiny chair and now with the cabinet portfolio, this project is one of the most consulted and engaged upon projects that we've ever had, and I think we've now got to get on and implement it and look at the impact that these sort of approaches actually do have in mode shift and getting people out of their cars, because that's where we're trying to get to. So I think that the reason why we've suggested these the financial allocations and the overall approaches, because we think it's the right thing to do, and it's in line with our strategic approach on transport. The Birmingham Transport Plan is a transformational, bold agenda. We've got our slogan, be bold, be Birmingham, and that's what it means to start making some difficult decisions, but to try and take people with us as we make them. Because we all know that in the end, the quality of life in Birmingham, if we can start to build approaches like this. So I would recommend these recommendations to Cabinet colleagues, and I hope you support them.
Thank you. Can we agree their recommendations 2.1 through to 2.7? So agree? Thank you. Item 14 then is citywide additional licensing, houses in multiple occupation. Sharon.
Thank you very much. So this report is in regards to additional licensing, and as everybody will remember, earlier on we came forward with a selective licensing approach, which was approved by the Secretary of State and covered 25 wards. Following on from that consultation, there was a number of people across the city, including members who wasn't in the 25 wards, who wanted some form of licensing or coverage in their particular area. And because of the amount of groundwork that private sector team has done in terms of data collection for the selective licensing, we was able to pull that work together. Consultations taken place across the city, and this is for additional licensing, which is for non-mandatory HMOs. Whereas mandatory HMOs is about 2,455 across the city. If we approve this today and look to move forward to start the work on this on June the 5th, it means that we could potentially be bringing in a predicted 9,500 HMOs into a licensing scheme. This will make a huge difference to local communities. A lot of members speak about HMOs in their local areas. I would like to make the caveat that this does not include exempt accommodation. It's slightly different because of the rules on some of those properties. And I'm really hopeful that you'll approve this today. There is a fee of £755, but just to give that reassurance to those that are in the areas of the 25 wards that got selective licensing, what would take place is that the team will look at which is the most appropriate licence for them, so that they only have to purchase one.
Thank you. John.
Thank you. Very, very much welcome moving forward with this. Can I just pick up the point about exempted housing? Because part of what I raised on the previous report was heading in this direction, which is that it's quite obvious there's a number of properties out there which are HMOs, which are dressed up as exempt housing. We know that the owners of them are making more profit by getting more higher levels of rent because they claim it's exempt. They claim to be putting in support, which isn't there. They're even apparently charging the tenants for support, which isn't of any quality at all. Would it be possible to hit a double whammy where you could remove the exempt status from bogus properties and then hit them with the licensing at the same time, so that there's a double whammy for people who are abusing the system, so that they face an increased risk and an increased threat to deter them from abusing the system? So they're brought into the licensing system because they're actually running bogus HMOs.
Thank you. I definitely agree. We ought to be doing all we can, within all powers we've got, to make sure there isn't bogus claims. But what I would say, if we find there are, we should also hit them with a breach of planning, because they won't have planning permission to operate as an HMO. Obviously supportive of this coming forward, but I have a request really. So this report now includes more evidence than was available at the time, or than was included in the selective licensing report. So can a review be done to see if this would now allow any additional wards to be able to go into selective licensing as well, so that we could make an additional request to the government to expand the area in Birmingham covered by selective licensing on the basis of this new additional evidence that now is collected.
There's no one else, Sharon?
Okay, to start off with Councillor Hunt's comments, I completely understand the frustrations around exempt accommodation and the differences. Exempt accommodation is viewed as, it's not viewed as the private rented sector in law. And I think we've said this in a number of briefings. It's not viewed as that in law unless it's the private type. So our hands are tied, and that's why we have been pushing for legislation change, particularly around planning rules. If they change the legislation in terms of planning rules, then that means we possibly would be able to bring them into this. But as we stand, we cannot at the moment. But we do all that we can. So when there are inquiries brought forward in terms of exempt accommodation, particularly around where they feel that the providers not delivering what they're supposed to be doing, we do all the submissions off to the HB department, DWP, and everything down that route. But this is very separate to the HMO discussion. Councillor Alden, in terms of the selective licensing, the selective licensing application is slightly different because there's a number of criteria that you have to hit in there. There's not just a singular type of criteria. When we went through that process, we did work quite closely with the ministry to look at what was the best possible options and how could we get the biggest coverage approved. And it does need to be approved by Secretary of State. I will let Sajila say if that is a possibility, but I think she'll say probably not, and because of the work that's taken place, not because of the work that's taken place, but because of the criteria that needs to be met. But Sajila, can you just confirm?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, in terms of selective licensing, the evidence base is different to that of traditional licensing. So our evidence base for selective licensing was on deprivation and crime. And our evidence base for additional licensing is on insufficient management of the HMO sector. So unfortunately, we cannot go back to government and ask for a greater defined area, as we need to gather new evidence for any specific areas that we wanted to integrate into the selective licensing scheme, and it wouldn't be covered by the evidence that we've already gathered for additional licensing.
Robert.
Thank you. I would just ask we go away and just check that, because at the time the selective licensing came through, I appreciate that's the 2 grounds that Birmingham applied for, but there were other grounds that you could apply for it on, and the council said it didn't have that information. This report has some of that information in, so I'd ask if we could just go away and do a piece of work to check, because if there is that possibility, it surely would be sensible to try. I appreciate the government would have to approve it, and they might not, but it would surely be worth trying.
Yeah,
we're more than happy to look at the evidence that we have gathered through the additional licensing process to double check that it can't be used for selective licensing. However, in our discussions with DLUC, our current position is the 25 wards are covered. Is what they'd like us to progress with in the time being. We can obviously do a lot of things in the future if we see the effectiveness or not of both.
Okay, so I've understood. You'll explore the point that Robert's made, but we are going to continue subject to agreement today with the proposal that's in this report. Sharon.
Right, that's it. Thank you. I just need Cabinet to approve it, please.
Okay, let's see where we get to then. Can we agree recommendations 2.1 through to 2.4? Is that agreed? Thank you. Item 15 then is private rented sector leasing scheme, capital grant extension of delegation. Sharon again.
Okay, so this report has been to Cabinet previously. We're expecting to be awarded some money, 3.8 million, to set up a private rented sector leasing scheme to accommodate families experiencing homelessness. This was brought here previously for us to be able to put the bid in and accept the money once it comes in. but the sign off from the government didn't take place. And in between that time, we had a change of 2 prime ministers, which meant ministerial changes that accompanied those as well. We are still waiting for that approval to take place, but we didn't want to time ourselves out in terms of the delegated responsibility that was awarded to us through Cabinet. So what we are asking for is that that is extended. We are told, we do believe that a decision will be made fairly soon, but we did think that the last time we was here, so we don't want to run the risk of not being able to take that decision or follow through with that delegation with it being timed out. So I'm asking Cabinet to approve the extension.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any hands, so can we agree then recommendations? Sorry, Robert.
Thank you. Just 2 points. Under the understanding the reasoning that's needed for the request here to bypass some of the normal rules and award it without coming back to Cabinet for approval, would suggest it ought to come back to Cabinet for information afterwards, so you're aware of who it all got approved to, rather than just disappearing completely off the list. And secondly, I think the process or the plan, if I've read this right, is to effectively just work with some of the existing housing associations in Birmingham. I just request that the officers this is delegated to make sure that there is some sort of quality control process within that, to make sure that we're only using ones we haven't got existing problems with as a council, or existing cases against or anything like that. Thank you.
Sharon?
So I think the last time that we came here, I think, Bobby, that it was pretty much to be able for us to be able to come back and give an update when we did receive the money. But this process is to avoid us from having to arrange another emergency meeting in between when it does come through. So we will absolutely come back once it's been approved. So that's not a problem. In terms of the providers and the people that we're working with, I'll ask Steve Philpott to comment on that.
Steve?
Thank you, Councillor Thompson. Yes, and as the report says, we've already been doing engagement work, including through Birmingham Social Housing Partnership. And yes, we'll ensure that whichever provider or providers we use, we will make sure that there isn't other areas of the business where we're taking measures against that provider, that we need to obviously have a safe pair of hands that are going to be delivering these units on our behalf.
Thank you. With that then, can we agree recommendations 2.1 and 2.2? And agree? Thank you. 16, Multiply Financial Literacy Programme. Karen.
Thank you, Leader. And this really is a good news story. Cabinet is asked to approve acceptance of the national funding as set out in the bid document attached to the report. The purpose of the DFE Multiply programme is to increase levels of functional numeracy in the adult population across the UK. And Children, Young People and Families Directorate have a good track record on projects of this size. And this one seeks to support learners to improve their understanding and use of maths in their daily lives, at home and at work, and to feel more confident when doing so. So it will also generate improved labour market outcomes, fewer numeracy skills gaps reported by employers, and an increase in the proportion of adults that can use their math skills in sustained employment and or education. It's a 3-year programme to offer bespoke numeracy and financial literacy courses, which will include wider literacy skills to residents on low incomes, employed and unemployed, who are most affected by the current cost of living crisis. Over the course of the 3 years, the programme will engage with 650 residents in year 1 and 1,100 per year in years 2 and 3. It will improve budgeting capability, which includes practical knowledge to improve energy use, improve family financing, through improved understanding of things like interest rates, debt management, maximising income through smart spending skills, understanding when a bargain is a bargain and when it's not, and improve awareness of additional financial help and grants, particularly around energy schemes involving retrofits such as warmer homes. And if approved, the Adult Education Service will receive a total of £1,580,795 over the 3 years of this programme. So I commend it to you.
Thank you. Ewan.
Thank you very much, Ian. And yeah, we welcome this as well. As you say, government money coming via the combined authority. Ian's very keen to quote from our manifesto, so I'm sure he's going to close off with this, pointing out that this was in our manifesto. So we're very pleased about this. And I agree with you. Yeah, I mean, everyday numeracy is really important and fundamental to everyone making the best out of their life, etc. Not just obvious budgetary scenario, as you say. It's understanding the false economy. You know, to mean that, well, what is the true cost of something? What is good value? What isn't good value? And a more numerate sort of population, more skilled population is better for Birmingham. So yeah, I think it's a really positive story, and we really support it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, John.
Thank you. It's also a good reminder there are other ways of learning maths than GCSE and A-level. And this is something I looked at when I was doing education scrutiny back in the day. And I'm really glad to see it happening in this way, functional numeracy. I wonder whether there'll be an opportunity to do a lessons learned out of this, because clearly government policy seems to be moving in the direction of requiring all young people up to the age of 18 to continue to study maths. And the spin has been this will be maths GCSE that they have to sit, or something of that ilk. Whereas in fact, as I say, there are other ways of learning maths which are really very practical, and which people do need to have those skills, regardless of their ambitions and what they're doing in life. Everybody needs that kind of numeracy literacy, functional numeracy.
Yeah. There's much to other than say that this is the practical maths that people need to continue to learn as adults, although some of the more traditional maths elements also help people in their careers, being able to calculate areas and so on. But this is looking at the basics that support employability and family life.
Thank you. Can we agree on recommendations 2.1 through to 2.3? Is that agreed?
Agreed.
17 is domestic abuse homelessness prevention waiver. It's quite a complicated process that's happened here. I'll try to draw that out from the report. So we go all the way back to February of 2019, when City Housing piloted a specialist domestic abuse housing solutions and support service in partnership with Birmingham and Solihull Women's Aid. It was envisaged that pilot would be formalised by way of a contract variation to the Adult Social Care Commissioned Domestic Abuse Wellbeing Hub. Subsequently, though, what was identified was that the costs amounted to more than 50% of the Domestic Abuse Wellbeing Hub, so the HRA element could not be added onto that existing contract. In February of 2021, it was considered the single contractor negotiating route could apply given the COVID-19 flexibilities. However, subsequently, this approach was discounted because COVID-related issues and restrictions no longer applied. In spite of that, contractual commitment on the 14th of February 2021 was entered into following a verbal agreement by officers to continue the domestic abuse housing solutions and support service with Birmingham's Women's Aid until the 31st of March 2023. This was done with the best of intentions to maintain a vital service, and is currently being funded through the Homelessness Prevention Grant, which does have Cabinet approval. So this report notes a breach of the Council's procurement and contract governance rules and seeks a waiver in relation to these, and provides recommendations on appropriate measures to be taken to resolve the issue. Section 3 of the report gives further detail around this, but I'd like to draw attention to paragraph 3.6. Sets out that Birmingham Solihull's Women's Aid made representation to both members and officers regarding the potential financial impacts for Birmingham Solihull Women's Aid if they did not receive full funding for the HRA element of the domestic abuse hub. The then Deputy Chief Executive committed to looking into this matter and consideration of the need to proceed with payment under COVID delegation rules. Discussions amongst officers took place during February of 2021. But the legal advice that was received for a direct award on the basis of COVID was limited to the period March 2020 to March 2021. Continued reliance on the direct award provision was not appropriate, resulting in the actions taken being deemed a breach in respect of formalising the formalised governance arrangements of the council. So, as I've said, this report seeks approval by Cabinet, to retrospectively waive the procurement and contract governance rules by way of notifying a formal breach of the rules for the services currently placed with Birmingham Solihull Women's Aid, and authorisation for City Housing to undertake a new procurement to ensure compliant contractual arrangements are established by way of an open tender process using a compliant procurement route. We will ensure that there is no break in service provision, because throughout the period of COVID and lockdown and beyond, we have seen a significant increase in domestic abuse, and therefore we wish to continue with these arrangements. But to repeat, a planned procurement activities report will be submitted to Cabinet outlining City Housing's intention to establish a settled position going forward. Now, I realise that is complicated, and there may well be questions that now follow, and Becky Hellard has joined us via Teams for any questions that are asked. Robert.
Thank you. And this is an absolute mess, as been said, but it actually seems to, from looking at the waiver itself, predate even that introduction. So the waiver itself talks about the original tender process for the DA Wellbeing Hub in 2020, and mentions that contract said there may be the possibility of adding HRA activities later. The reason it wasn't added by that route is because it would have been more than 50%. Yeah. And so it doesn't meet procurement rules. The fact that contract went out to tender with a clause that was impossible to be delivered suggests there was a further misunderstanding of the procurement rules at that stage as well, that needs identifying and fixing to ensure that doesn't continue on future procurements. When you look at the details here, it does raise a number of questions. The first is, have we broken any data protection rules? Because there will have been a risk, at least, if not an actual, of sharing sensitive data via a non-compliant contract with an outside body. So has that been checked out to see if actually there's been data breaches here? When you look at the details of the report, 1.3 and 4.2, and indeed the waiver themselves, all talk about the contract was extended via a verbal agreement, and I'll come back to that, to the 31st of March 2023. But when you look at the recommendations, it's asking for a waiver to the end of June for the procurement to take place. But it doesn't seem to be an actual request to extend the contract between the 31st of March to the end of June. Would it not need an extension of contract as well as merely a waiver accepting we break procurement to be able to extend it to the end of June? I also appreciate some more detailed information about what financial and legal risks this has placed the council at. And indeed, has a review been done to see if any other contracts done over the last couple of years have also mistakenly applied or tried to apply the COVID rules, and therefore are going to need similar waivers to be brought forward? And indeed, how many contracts were extended verbally during COVID, as appears to have been happening here? I find it quite astonishing that the council would extend a contract in that way. There were many ways that the documents could be signed during COVID. So for us to commit to spending millions of pounds via a verbal agreement does feel like that issue needs tackling and checking elsewhere across the process as well. As I say, it is a quite astonishing situation the council has found itself in. And it's something that we need to ensure we're not leaving ourselves open, or the council's not leaving itself open to further issues elsewhere in the service. And then the final, across the council, and then the final issue to raise is what exactly has happened since this has taken place. Originally, the service was told it couldn't do this route, couldn't use the COVID rules. The service seemed to disagree with the procurement advice. clearly there's an issue there that needs sorting out about who ultimately gives the final advice. But when you get to earlier this year, February 2022, legal services made it clear that this contract did not support the single contract negotiation process and did not satisfy the provisions of the public contract regulations 2015, nor the procurement procedure rules as in the council constitution at the time. That's February 2022. It's basically a year later we're getting this waiver. Did they just ignore legal services advice? Did the service just continue using a procured service that hadn't been procured properly? What happened between them being told it was not correct and wasn't a valid contract and now?
Okay, thank you. Let me just pick up a couple of the points you raised, and then I'll bring in Becky Hellard. First of all, this decision was not made verbally. There was actually a decision taken at, if you recall, during COVID, there was different governance arrangements. So there was an officer group, I think it's called Gold Command, and that's where the decision was actually taken. And just to be clear on the legal advice, an extension to March of 21 under the COVID position, I think, would have been okay. The problem here is that it's continued beyond that date. Let me bring.
Sorry, and just to clarify on that point, it was under 1.3 where it says Housing Solutions and Support made a contractual commitment on the 14th of February. This is understood to be following a verbal agreement by officers. That was where the verbal agreement came from. Were you saying that line is wrong in the report?
Let me bring in Becky Hellard, because as I say, during the period of COVID, there was different governance arrangements, as you'll be aware. Officers were taking decisions rather than elected members, and there was a process set up for that. I'd also point out that during that period, it was a period of extraordinary pressure and a desire to ensure that the right thing was done is what comes through here as to why this actually happened. And like everyone, people do from time to time make mistakes. Becky.
Yeah, and 1.3 is one of those. So absolutely right. Gold Command emergency procedures were in place for the extension to 2021. The extension in 1.3 to 2023 was a verbal agreement outside of those Gold Command structures, and hence that's part of the waiver here to say retrospectively we need to correct all this. Okay, so that's an officer issue at that time. In terms of data breaches, you've got Peter in the room anyway, but the contract itself, which was extended, albeit not following our constitution, would have had data breaches clauses in it. So that would have covered any potential data breaches. I haven't read the data elements of data breach clauses in the contract, but that would have been covered by any extension of the contract. You asked a number of questions, Councillor Auden. I've written down as many as I can, so I will answer those that I can, and those that I miss, I'll need you to re-ask, please. In terms of the financial and legal risks, the legal risk would have been one of challenge, because we hadn't followed our constitution. We haven't had that challenge, but that would have been the legal risk. That would have come with it, should there have been a legal challenge, a financial implication of that legal challenge, but that did not happen. In terms of other contracts, so you'll know that that we have recently reset up category management across the council, and with that goes the pulling together of a corporate contracts register. That work is nearing completion. Once that is complete, we will have a full picture of where we are with all of our contracts. Okay, until we have fully completed that, we can't answer your question over whether there are others in the authority, as you'll know. I think your other question was the extension to the end of June. That is referring back to 1.3. So that's part of this waiver to clear that up. I think those were all of the notes that I scribbled as you were talking.
Yeah, I think, Becky, so the waiver in recommendation 2.1, the waiver is authorising this extension, isn't it, to June 23?
absolutely is formalising what should have been retrospectively what should have been done at the time.
Robert?
Thank you. Sorry to be pernicious about this. Just really want clarity. So 2.1 does not mention the word extension. It suggests that the original implied contract arrangements that were agreed was from March 21 to June 23. Obviously, we know from elsewhere in the report that isn't the case, so it requires an extension. I guess I'm looking to legal services as to whether or not this is a wording that actually allows that extension or not. And then the other point was just about what had happened since legal services instructed in February 22 that this wasn't a valid procurement agreement that had been done, and yet we've not had a waiver produced until January 2023.
Okay.
Yeah, just to come back on that. So my understanding is that since June 2022, what Legal and Housing have been working on together is the right way to correct the situation that we're now in. And this is the correction come forward. Now, the reason that this has taken longer than one might normally expect is because there's been a lot of change of officers in both services. So there's been an awful lot of going investigation, research, going back and collecting all of that information together, because we wanted to make sure that we had done that thoroughly. That's now been done and is in front of you here today.
Yeah, and the wording in 2.1 is that we're approving the waiver request. So we're approving a request to go outside the Constitution for this period, March 21 to June 23. Is that correct, Becky?
It's now formalising what was not formalised at the time.
Yeah. So it's authorising that spend, isn't it? Through to June 23. Yeah. Okay. I think we're okay on the wording in that case. As you say, Robert, not an ideal situation to ended up in. However, can we agree recommendations 2.1 through to 2.3? Thank you. Item 18 is appointments to outside bodies, just one this month, and that is Yardley Great Trust. And the recommendation is that Honorary Alderman Stuart Stacey is replaced with Councillor Zafar Iqbal for the remaining period of the term, which runs through to the 4th of March 2026. Can we agree with that?
Agreed.
Thank you. And then we've got the usual plan procurement activities. So first of all, e-decision plan procurement activities for the period February 23 through to April 23. Any comments on this, Ewan?
Yeah, it's got a point on the Eclipse software as a service. I think the report refers to it as tactical. I thought that was stretching the word tactical a bit until you thought of tactical withdrawal, retreat route. Because if I've got this right, OLM Systems Limited are unable to implement the finance module within Eclipse, so we're still running legacy system supplied by Care First, if I read the report correctly. So I really what I'm just looking at is where is the extra costs? There must be extra cost involved in this, I'm pretty sure, if we're having to run two systems because the supplier can't deliver the first. And I'm just wondering sort of who's picking up these extra costs. Is it OLM Systems who are picking it up for not delivering?
Sorry, which one was it, Ewan? Yeah, I know.
Yeah, let me.
Eclipse software.
Eclipse, I've got it, yeah. Okay. Peter, can you pick that?
I'm afraid I don't have the details of that.
Okay, we'll send you something in writing. Can we agree then recommendations 2.1 and 2.2? Agreed? Thank you. And then non-key decisions, Yvonne? Same period?
Sorry, this report summarizes the non-key activity for February 2023 to April 23, which are for noting.
No comments on this, so can we agree recommendations 2.1 and 2.2? Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Next to other urgent business, there's one item listed under other urgent business, and that is the Adult Social Care Discharge Fund. This is a decision that was not on the forward plan, and that is because the council only received confirmation of funding on the 21st of December last year, And grant condition updates were provided on the 23rd of December and 5th of January this year. So this decision is now being made at the earliest opportunity to ensure funds reach care providers in line with grant conditions and the expectations of government. So that's the reason this was not on the forward plan. Marion.
Thank you, Leader. So as you just stated, this report is for the Adult Social Care Discharge Fund, which is confirmed actually on the 18th of November 2022 as part of national budget announcements. Birmingham City Council has been allocated just over £4.6 million, and then Birmingham Solidarity Integrated Care Board has been allocated a total of over £5 million, with a total for us to receive the allocation of £6,040,793 of Adult Social Care Discharge Fund monies for Birmingham adult social care providers. The purpose of the grant is to enable more people to be discharged to an appropriate setting with adequate and timely social care support as required. Prioritise those approaches that are most effective in freeing up the maximum number of hospital beds and reducing bed days lost within the funding available, and to boost general adult social care workforce capacity through recruitment and retention activity, where that will help to reduce delayed discharges from hospital. This is a Section 31 ring-fenced grant, and as you already stated, Leader, the reason for this report to be brought as an urgent late report was because we only just received confirmation of the funding, of the amount of the funding that we would receive on the 21st of December. And then the most recent update on the grant condition and the reporting was provided to us on the 5th of Jan. And so the decision is therefore being made at the earliest opportunity to ensure that funds reach care providers in line with the grant conditions and also the expectations of government and the provider market. I also just want to say thank you to the officers who've been working really hard in order to turn this report around within very tight timescales to be able to bring it here today. And the conditions of the grant expect local authorities to transfer funds promptly to support current hospital pressures, and that there was therefore not sufficient time to bring it in the normal process. The reporting requirements of the grant mean that we'll need to make returns to NHS England regularly throughout January until March 2023. And as this element of the funding is over 60% of the total allocation, unless we can demonstrate that the funding is being used before the end of January, there's a risk that it may be withdrawn. And then finally, as the ongoing impact of the pandemic and winter pressures for the NHS care providers and their staff continues, the funds will provide essential financial support to care providers in supporting recruitment and retention measures. And then ultimately, there's also £6 million that will largely end up back in the local economy. So I just request that Cabinet supports this report. And I just wonder whether Graham had anything to add. No.
Thank you, Marion. Robert.
Thank you. I mean, we're all for the council using expedited processes when grant funding is made available at short notice. What I find interesting here is I don't think this is applicable in this situation. As when you go on the government website and you look at the information that was published, the letter to health and social care sector from the minister was published on the 18th of November. The grant allocations was published on the 18th of November. Those haven't changed from the figures published on the 18th of November. And indeed, interestingly, the grant conditions was also published on the 18th of November. The report picks up some of this when you get to the substantive report. This isn't mentioned in the request to consider an urgent item. But when you get to the substantive report under 1.1, it confirms funding was indeed confirmed on the 18th of November, and that spend has to be between December the 15th and the end of March. When you go to page 688 under 3.52, it highlights that a planned spending report was due by the 16th of December, including proof it was agreed by the council. The reason that was required was under the grant conditions, it does say you need to provide a planned spending report by 4 weeks after the details of the funds is published on the 18th. So it's by the 16th of December it's required, confirming planned use of this grant against the PCF plan, and the use of the funding has been agreed by both the local authority and the Integrated Care Board. So that's really important because it goes on to explain that the funding is at risk if that isn't approved by them. Clearly, it wasn't approved, it's coming now. So therefore, I think the Cabinet needs to be clear that if any of this funding ends up being reduced, it's because that timescale wasn't met. That timescale was meetable because Bristol Council held an urgent Cabinet meeting in December to meet that timescale, agreeing the information. So clearly, if Bristol Council could have, Birmingham City Council could have. So the question really becomes, why was this not considered in December? And why did neither the Cabinet nor the Scrutiny Chairman notice this?
Right.
I mean, the straight answer is we had to get approval of the ICB to the spending proposals, which took us right into the end of December. And at that point, we were only ready to bring a report. In doing the consultation work with the RCB to ensure that we can put in place plans that they've agreed.
Okay, but if we were notified in November, can't recall the date that you mentioned, Robert, but if we were notified in November that this was going to happen, couldn't we have put something on the forward plan at that point?
It wasn't entirely clear what was going to be on offer at that. They were indicative of that.
No, but we could have put a placeholder on the forward plan, would be my point.
We could do it after then take it back up. We didn't make a report form.
Yeah, okay. Okay, well, Robert.
Thank you. Firstly, I think that's a very eminently sensible suggestion, Leader. I've never heard anyone complain that the report's been removed from the forward plan because it didn't happen. So I certainly think a placeholder would be very sensible. But also, just to be clear, the request doesn't blame delays with the ICB negotiations. The request blames the government. But if it's not the government's fault, this request is incorrect and can't be considered.
We've had a really long history of this now. The government announced it very late in the day, and then being expected to suddenly jump up and do it in a very, very short period of time. Roughly 700 providers, not as straightforward as it is. That's the reality of it.
I fully appreciate that, but this report doesn't say the answer you gave now, which is a perfectly legitimate answer. It took longer to negotiate with the Integrated Care Board. Totally would understand that. But this doesn't say that.
Right. What I think we can do is we can amend the report on the forward plan and exempt information not notified. But we need to take this report for all of the reasons that Graham and Mariam have been saying. So if you're comfortable with that, Robert, that's what we'll do. In which case, can we agree then the recommendations, which are 2.1 to 2.2? Is that agreed?
Agreed.
Thank you. Does anybody have any other item of urgent business? In which case, we will return to item 6 on the agenda. Thank you for your patience, Jane. Digitally connected city enabled for future growth. Would you like to introduce the public report, and then we will obviously go into private session to consider the questions John wishes to raise on the private appendices. Jane.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Leader. Really pleased to bring to Cabinet today this important report on the state of digital connectivity within Birmingham. Digital connectivity using fibre rather than more traditional technologies is vital for businesses in Birmingham to compete in a global world. It is key enabler for the government's levelling up ambitions and the City Council's levelling up strategy published last year, as well as supporting our Route to Zero ambitions. The West Midlands tech sector is expected to generate at least £2.7 billion as a local economy by 2025. It is home to 18,394 startups and more incubators and accelerators than any other city outside of London, and has the fastest growing tech sector and the largest 5G test bed across the UK. Access to full fibre has been identified as one of the key foundations within the Digital City Roadmap, enabling sustainable economic growth through increased business productivity. We know this because business stakeholders and businesses told us so when we consulted them during the development of the Digital City Programme and Roadmap, which Cabinet approved in April last year. The availability of full fibre will deliver both faster speeds and lower costs, which in turn support access to a wider range of services to residents, especially for those housebound and deprived households. This will also enable business innovation and growth, which will accelerate GVA growth. Analysis presented to Cabinet in April last year suggested that GVA growth could be as much as £760 million. Our analysis has shown that there is a patchwork of low quality and high cost connectivity across the city. The traditional providers are not addressing this patchwork at the pace and urgency that this city needs. Without intervention from Birmingham City Council, this is unlikely to change, and Birmingham will drop further behind other major metropolitan UK cities and combined authorities, as those cities are also recognising the issue and are intervening directly in this market. The Cabinet paper presents an outline business case for intervention in the provision of full fibre connectivity in the city, and in summary recommends the following. 2.1 notes the current state of full fibre coverage across the city and supports an intervention from the City Council in order to address the speed and coverage of full fibre rollout in Birmingham, where overall plans from providers do not address undeserved areas. The council commences a procurement which will build, deploy and commercialise a city spine full fibre network targeting the undeserved constituencies with less than 50% full fibre coverage, using the current BCC network spend in partnership with the new partner over a 20-year period and as the enabler, and authorises the procurement and investment request of 0.656 million to procure specialist resource to deliver the final business case. And I ask then that Cabinet can approve recommendations 2.1 to 2.33 in the report.
Anybody any questions on the public report before we go forward? Ewan?
Yeah, on the public section, I could probably give Liz a run for her money on this, but don't worry, I won't. I agree that I think this is what happens when you don't have competition, really. You've got BT Openreach, they sort of pretend they're two separate companies, but if you talk to an Openreach engineer, you're left in no doubt you're talking to BT. And I think they're just cherry picking the best areas off. I live in an area that, according to the Openreach website, is already completed fibre to the premises, and I don't have fibre to the premises, and I can't see it coming anytime soon. And so I think that that what's being offered here, I can imagine it being very attractive for businesses if the council is able to pull this off. Some of the leased lines, the expense of those that BT is still milking at the moment, there's no financial incentive for them to release those lines. So I can see that. And I understand that this fibre can run backhaul for 5G. So I think that could be useful because I think that for residents, I don't know how much this is going to do for them. I think some of the 5G broadband offers are looking very aggressive at the minute. I think some of them at the moment are offering, I think, one of them is offering £10 a month for 100 megabits a second for 6 months and then £20 a month after that. Now, obviously, we've got some issues about siting of some of these 5G masts. I've got no problems if they're put in a commercial area or a well-sited area that doesn't bother the street scene. I've got issues when they're plonked in the middle of a green space. I think that they could be a bit more sympathetic where they site these masts. And certainly there are some places, if they're going to pay a slight fee for the return they get, I think they should pay it. But I think overall, I support this. I think the only caveat I have is that there's risk with this. Commercially, risk's not a bad thing, but I think this is public money all the same. Councils don't have a great background on commercial interest, so I have a slight concern there, but I think that this ultimately going forward is something worth, if it brings better digital connectivity to Birmingham, which is really poor at the moment, if it's successful, we accept it.
You're in agreement, are you? Okay, I don't think you need to respond to that then, Jane. In which case then, in line with Regulation 4 of the Local Authorities Arrangements Regulations, can I formally move the exclusion of the press and the public? Fortunately, they'll have to leave. And Baljinder, could you suspend the live feed, please? Thank you very much. Okay, we're back in public session considering item 6 on the agenda, a digitally connected city enable for future growth. We've dealt with the issue raised on the private appendix. So does anybody else have anything further on the public report? No? In which case then, can we agree recommendations 2.1 through to 2.3.3? Not agree. Great. Thank you all very much.